Welcome back to episode 51 of the Real Life Podcast. Real Life is a podcast all about personal development for creative people. This space can be confusing, so I hope to use this podcast to help shed some light on some of those challenges and help you guys navigate through this creative space, and hopefully, through sharing your art online, make something of yourselves. I hope you enjoyed this episode, and if you do, I would really appreciate it if you could share the episode with a friend. Share it with someone you think may appreciate it. Share it with someone you think might find value from this episode. And if you do, I would be much appreciative. And without taking up any more of your time, here is today's episode. Camera is rolling and we are back for episode 51 of the podcast. How you doing? We're back to recording these episodes because I think I need to take a bit of my own advice with this podcast and start posting them on YouTube again. So if you do enjoy this podcast on YouTube, I guess if you enjoy the podcast on YouTube, you'll be watching it on YouTube right now. But if you have sort of opted for Spotify and you do enjoy watching it for whatever reason, I don't know why you would want to sit here and watch my face for however long the episode goes for each week. But if that's what you want to do, then that's what you want to do, and I'm not going to judge you for it. So I'm going to start, or at least try to start, posting these on YouTube again, because I started out doing that and it was good, and I just lost the habit of doing it because it takes ages. It just takes forever to to set this up and have the lights set up and everything going and all that sort of stuff, and it's just so many more steps to getting a podcast out every single week. But I need to remind myself that those are the necessary steps to growing a podcast. I was having this conversation the other night with someone who, one of my neighbors started a podcast, but one of the things that I said was that if you want to grow your podcast, if you want to have a podcast that finds an audience, then you need to have it on YouTube, because the issue with audio platforms, and this is just a podcast about a podcast again, but I think the issue with audio platforms I've found is there's no discoverability. Your audience will stay the exact same, and that's the issue that I've been finding lately with this podcast, is that we're just sitting stationary with our audience and it's not growing. So I want to use this as an opportunity to start sharing this on YouTube again, and then hopefully find some new listeners. But thank you so much for coming back. I really appreciate all of the listeners of this podcast. Even though we haven't found any new ones lately, I really do appreciate everyone listening to the podcast. How are you all doing? For those that don't know, for my international listeners, some of the listeners around the world, because I know we do have a fair few of you from all over the world, but for my Australian listeners, we're all in lockdown. It's quite funny. I don't want to make jokes about it because obviously it's stressful, but I'm going through it, so I feel like I can at least joke about it from my perspective. But isn't it hilarious that in one lockdown, Sydney has already already surpassed Victoria as the worst state for handling COVID? Like, we've had we're now in our 6th lockdown here in Victoria. Oh yeah, for anyone, like, I've seen a bunch of TikToks for randomly, I don't know why, they're coming up on my Facebook or Instagram or YouTube and even shorts. But people are saying that Australia is going through their 6th lockdown. That's not true. Australia is not going through their 6th lockdown. Victoria is going through their 6th lockdown. But I find it hilarious that Sydney, in one lockdown, has single-handedly ruined their reputation as far as handling COVID. So, in all jokes aside, I do hope you guys get through this. You will get through this. You just need to actually lock down rather than this sort of half lockdown, half freedom, half not really caring sort of situation you've got going on at the moment. So I'm sorry if that offended any of my Sydney listeners, but also I've been through 6 lockdowns here in Victoria. So if out of everyone, I feel that out of everyone in Australia who can bully Sydney for the situation that they're in right now, it's Victorians. So I apologize, but also welcome to the club. How you doing? How's everyone doing this week? I had actually had a really nice week this week. I'm stressed up to my eyeballs. I've sort of had a lot of things compound on each other as far as deadlines coming to a head and things that I wanted to get done coming to a head simultaneously with the last two lockdowns. So obviously I got stuck in Cairns longer than not stuck's the wrong word. I ended up staying in Cairns with my girlfriend longer than I expected to because of the lockdown last time. Came back, the lockdown went longer than I expected. We had a week out and then we have another lockdown, and all during that time I was supposed to get a whole heap of stuff done and just ended up not getting any of it done. On the bright side, I'm glad with the progress that I'm making on my YouTube channel. Also, for those of you, I feel like the audience that I have here on my podcast are also the audience that I have on YouTube, which is both a very small and niche audience. And then a lot of you have been watching my live streams. So if you guys have been enjoying this podcast, you're likely also someone who was joining in on the last few live streams that I've done on YouTube. I've been really enjoying that lately. I don't want to ramble too much at the beginning of this podcast because I want these podcasts to be informative and educational and valuable for you guys, but I just wanted to give you guys a little catch up briefly. As far as book club, because I did get a lot of questions about that in the live stream. A lot of you are very interested in the books that I'm reading and what I'm doing, so I wanted to go through those real quick. There's 3 that I'm making progress on at the moment. Sorry for that. There's 3 that I'm making progress on at the moment. The first one is the E-Myth Revisited by Michael Gerber, or Gerber, same thing. The E-Myth Revisited. So for those of you on YouTube, this book right here. I haven't actually started it yet. I literally bought it the other day to start it. I'm going to read Sell Like Crazy by Sabri Subi. You guys definitely would have seen his ads on YouTube. Very skeptical about this one because it seems like he's written, from his ads, it seems like this book is just marketing for his business. But, I mean, it's got an attractive cover. It's a chunky book. The font's not massive. I mean, there are some pages that it's like this could be half a page and it's 2 pages long, but I feel like there's going to be something. I'm really obsessed with learning about sales right now, so that's one thing that I'm doing. And then I'm also reading, or I'm about halfway through, Make Time by Jake Knapp and John Zaratsky, which I've really enjoyed so far. It's a book mostly about sort of prioritizing your life and taking control back over time. So if that's something you're interested in at all, then I would highly recommend it. And I also just finished The 4-Hour Workweek by Tim Ferriss. So that was an amazing read. I really didn't expect to enjoy that one as much as I did, because I guess like I kind of, it's a very clickbaity title, obviously. It's become a very cult classic, I guess, as far as the nomadic lifestyle. And also I don't really have that much of an interest in living that kind of life. Like obviously traveling would be amazing and getting the freedom would be amazing. But I kind of saw that book and I was like, I like my work. I enjoy working and I'm a bit of a homebody and I like routine. So I felt like it wasn't going to be tailored towards me, but I highly recommend it now in reading it because I feel like what the book provides is far beyond just the lifestyle design of a digital nomad. It's more so tailored towards taking your freedom back, which is very in line with what I want to do. My goals and ambitions with everything that I do is essentially to be able to do what I love or do what I want every single day. That's my ambition with my work. That's my ambition with everything that I do, is just to be able to do what I want every day and make a good living from it. And this book kind of teaches you or encourages you to do those sort of things. And it gives you a very realistic and very approachable format for doing that. Obviously, it's a very old book, or not very old. It's about 15 years old, I think, right now, which means that, obviously the last 15 years. Did we even have the iPhone 15 years ago? I can't remember if that came out to whenever, who cares? But what I'm saying is a lot of the things that he talks about as far as specific techniques and programs to use and the specifics around the advice that he gives, some of it's quite outdated. So all I did for those situations is just skipped over some of the chapters where he's like, use this specific program to manage your emails. It's like that company doesn't exist anymore. So there's a few things like that, but as long as you can get over that, then that's okay. This week I wanted to talk about being unique. I've spoken about this a lot in the last 2 live streams that I did on YouTube, and people seem to be quite receptive of it. So I wanted to talk about it in the podcast. But I wanted to talk about the idea of chasing being unique, because I think there is this idea that achieving something original or doing something unique is going to be the key to your success as a creative person or success as an artist. And that's somewhat true, yes. If you create something that no one's ever seen before, then yes, you're going to be able to achieve success, but it's how you approach that I think people have backwards. I think people have this idea that what you make has to be something unique. What you make has to be something entirely original, and it's just not the case at all. One of the things that I sort of have approached more and more, or something that I did subconsciously when I was first starting out, one of the things that I did when I was first starting out a lot was take the people that I was inspired by and try to recreate their work. One of the first people I ever sort of copied, for lack of a better term, or stole from the idea of stealing like an artist. One of the first artists that I stole from was Yantastic, Peter Yan. He's also from Melbourne, funnily enough. But Peter Yan was one of the first people that I quote unquote stole from. And I think that I've carried that more and more throughout my creative work, but never really understood the purpose behind it. I kind of saw it as a learning tool. What I used to do was I would take their work and I would go, how can I reverse engineer creating this? And then I would, for a while, just copy them, a blatant copy. If you go back to some of my work, I don't know if it's still up, but some of my oldest drone work, I guess, drone photography or whatever, is a carbon copy of Peter Yan's work. But the reason why I was doing it was not to take his audience. It wasn't to copy his work. It was to learn. My purpose behind doing that was to learn how he did what he did, because I admired his work. I liked his photography. I really liked the way his images looked and they seemed appealing to me. So rather than just being like, oh, well, I need to find my thing that's appealing, I just went, okay, how can I recreate his work and learn how to recreate his work with the intention of learning how to do things, with the intention of learning the techniques that he uses to do that. And it wasn't for a long time, or it wasn't until I read Steal Like an Artist that I recognized that this is actually something that a lot of artists continue to do throughout their entire career. So one of the things that I learned, or one of the ways that I began to recognize this as important nowadays for me, is that I took everything that I've learned from the certain artists that I've stolen from. Like I went for a while, and this is something that I did like last year, as recently as last year, is I really love the way that Short Stash's work looks. I don't necessarily like his subject matter. Like I really love his photography, but I'm not necessarily trying to recreate his subject matter. But as far as pure color, as far as like the way his images look and feel, I really, really like it. So what I did to achieve that is I took 4 of my favorite of his images. So 4, whatever, like one was a portrait, one was a landscape, one was like a product photography, and I took them and made them into a 4x4 panel. And from that, I then imported that 4x4 panel into Lightroom. And then every single time I was editing an image, I would open up the reference panel in Lightroom and create the color in my own images. So the subject matter was completely different. One time I was I was editing a composite that I'd made in Photoshop, like the wackiest of wacky composites that I have. Like it was it was one of the whales shot, or the one where the whales in the desert and whatnot. Or recently, one of the ones that I used it for was the pirate ship edit, where the pirate ship's in the sand dunes. That's a subject matter that Short Stash would never ever touch. But I used his reference images to create the color and the feel of the images. But the thing that clicked for me in my head in that moment was that no one's going to recognize that, because I'm combining multiple inspiration sources. And suddenly, what appears to me as a copy or a stolen piece of creativity is something that other people view as unique, or other people view as original, when in reality, it's far, far from original. The Photoshop compositing, some of the techniques I learned from Benny Productions, some of the techniques I used in there were things that I take or have taken from Benny Productions. Some of the ideas for blending are things that I've taken from Visuals of Julius. Some of the things that I learnt for color from Short Stash, but I've combined all of them into one that people now see as original or unique. And I think that the sooner you can recognize that nothing you ever make is going to be original, nothing you ever make is going to be entirely unique, the sooner you can release that pressure from yourself and understand like, oh, okay, how can I use my taste? How can I use my style? How can I use what I like and enjoy out of certain creativity to build my own style? One of the things that I still do to this day is I wish I could pull it up in I wish I was using OBS for this because I could literally pull it up on this podcast, but maybe I'll overlay it here in the edit, and I need to remind myself to do that. So maybe I won't, but if I do, check out YouTube. But essentially what I used to do a lot when I was learning Photoshop, like maybe 2 years ago now or a year ago, when I was trying to really get good at compositing, is I would pick one of like Benny's or Julius or someone I admire, Phase Runner's edits, and I would try to find all the same assets on Envato Elements or online or on Unsplash or whatever they use to gain those elements or those assets, and I would try to recreate that artwork as a carbon copy of that artwork. I would never post them anywhere because it's just a learning tool that I would use, but I would essentially use this exercise as a way to reverse engineer their style and learn the techniques that they used. Obviously, it's not perfect because all I have is the stock images they used and the final edit, so I have to essentially copy it like a painting. And obviously, if you copy someone else's painting, you're not going to use the exact same techniques of blending paint and blending color and creating highlights and everything that's used to do it. But by reverse engineering those techniques, you're at least able to try to teach yourself what was used to create that thing. And from that one time, or from the few times that I did that, I'm now able to take those techniques and incorporate into my work. And even though those things in my mind are taken from Benny or taken from Julius or taken from Short Stash, once I've combined them with enough inspiration sources, you're able to create a style that is recognizably your own. And that's what I'm getting at today. So what I want to talk about as far as why stealing like an artist is important is because it's a fast track way to create your own style. One of the quotes, and I wish I had it in front of me, or steal like an artist. If you want to learn essentially everything that I'm speaking about in today's podcast, is go and learn about stealing like an artist. Stealing like an artist is essentially everything that I'm talking about today is essentially taken from Steal Like an Artist. And the irony of that is hilarious because nothing I ever speak about on this podcast is original either. Most of the time, I'm just regurgitating countless pieces of information that I've gained from reading, from watching videos, from listening to podcasts, whatever it is that I'm talking about here. I'm condensing that information into a way that I can use it for myself and then share it with you guys. I've said this countless times before, but this podcast is just my experience. This podcast is me just talking about the things that I've done, the things that I've experienced, and the ways that I've helped myself to achieve the things that I want to achieve. And then I'm sharing it with you guys. But none of those things are ever original. Nothing I've ever done on this show has been entirely original. But that's okay, because you guys watch this and you enjoy it for what I'm bringing to the table. And I think that people need to recognize that what people are going to enjoy, even though, let's break it down like this. If you're like, I don't know, like for example with me, if you're a YouTuber for Photoshop, or you're a YouTuber for productivity, or you're a YouTuber for a certain thing, the people are coming to that information for the information shared by you. They're not coming for the information and going, oh, well, this guy kind of sucks. They're coming to you because they like you, but they don't like what you bring to the table. They like the information that you bring to the table. Does that make sense? It's like, I think it's a good way to keep a cap on your ego with doing stuff online. It's because at the end of the day, people like the information, but they like the information the way you present it. They like people come to you because they like your photography, but they like the photography the way you present it. Does that make sense? It's like, it allows you to stop yourself from getting a big head in relation to thinking that people are coming to your YouTube channel because they like what you have to say. No, they like you presenting the information that you're giving to them. There are some cases where people turn into a bit of develop a bit of a cult following, and those people will listen blindly to anything that person says, and that's an entirely different situation. But in general, I think that people would do very well for themselves if they understood that If you're a photographer and you've got 50,000, 100,000, 200,000 followers, people aren't blindly following you. They're following your photography, and they like the way that you present that particular type of photography. And I think that that's a good way to keep a cap on your ego, because it makes you understand that what you are bringing to the table is just your interpretation of someone else's information. Does that make sense? Anyway, what I wanted to talk about particularly today is how to use stealing like an artist to develop your own style. And I want to talk about the processes that I went through. So it comes back to the idea of, and if you watch my latest YouTube video, it's the idea of closing the gap. When you first start out, like I said, you have great taste for artwork. You have great taste for photography or YouTube videos or filmmaking or whatever it is that you want to do. The reason why you start out originally is because you have really good taste for that particular thing. There might be something about the way that you see certain things. You might see the world differently. You might see photography a little bit differently, or filmmaking, or you might have an eye for composition, or a great way of storytelling. Whatever it is that you have that from day one. But what you don't have from day one is the skills capable of recreating that good taste. So early on, you're able to recognize, and I covered all this in my latest YouTube video, so please go and watch that if you are interested in anything I'm saying. But originally, you're able to notice the difference between your work and the work you admire. There's a clear gap between those two places. And the reason for that, like I said, is because you don't yet have the skills to recreate the style that you have great taste for. So one of the things that I highly recommend in the beginning is to utilize that taste to develop your own style. One of the things that I think people do with photography, and one of the things that I think I've done with filmmaking and photography and everything, is I go in blindly because I really like the medium, or I really like the style. I go in with no real direction, or I did go in with no real direction. This isn't something I do anymore. I have a very clear identity as far as what the stuff that I want to create now. But before, I would sort of go in blindly with the idea that I'm just going to be pulled in whatever direction I'm inspired by in the moment. And the issue with that is it doesn't utilize your taste. There's nothing that's your taste isn't being utilized by just being pulled in any direction. So the thing that I want you to do, or the thing that I did, is analyze that taste. Figure out what it is that you specifically like. Figure out what movies you like, what music you listen to, what photos you love, what photographies you admire, who you enjoy, like what work do you enjoy the most, and can build or consolidate those sources of information into a way that you can create an identity for yourself. So for me, it would be like we said, I really like Benny Productions compositions. I really love Phase Runner and his style of concept art. I really like Short Stash's color and his style. I really like Salvador Dali and just how crazy and abstract his paintings were. I really like movies like Place Beyond the Pines and the moody, gritty style of that sort of cinematic look. I really love things like movies that have a clear direction and a clear style that's kind of, if you just took that style and showed someone one of the images, it would be like, why is this so extreme? Like movies like Mad Max. It's like if you look at a single frame from Mad Max, it's like it's so yellow and so orange and so vibrant and weird and abstract, but you look at it in the work as a whole, then you're able to recognize why that style is important. And I really admire that about certain artists. I listen to a lot of hip hop, which means that I'm very geared towards storytelling. I like lyrics. I like songs that have a story. I like songs that make me cry and have emotions. And I like things that portray an emotion. So I've taken all that information and gone, okay, well, how can I use this to build or construct my own unique style? How can I use this information that I have in front of me for free to create the style that will be my own? Now, the easiest way for this is you can use this to go, okay, what are my favorite, and this is a simple one. I'm going to tailor this now towards just filmmakers. It's like if I took all the photographers that I really admire and I go, what do I love about these photographs? What is in these images that I really enjoy? So you'd go and create a column that goes, okay, these are the compositions that I tend to be geared towards. For me, I love center framing. I love simple information, simple storytelling. I love scale. And those are the things that I love about composition. And I can write all those down into my composition list as far as the requirements that build my taste or build my style. And from that information, I can go, okay, here's how I can build my images from now on. Here's how I can tell a story. Then I go, okay, what movies do I love? What stories do I love? What images have I really admired in the past as far as their feel and emotion and color? And I'll go, okay, all right, so grab a color picker literally in Instagram or Photoshop or whatever you want to use and go and grab colors from those images and build your color palette. That is now the color palette that you need to stick to, and suddenly you have composition and color palette, and you're able to construct a bit of a theme for yourself. And then you go, okay, what music do I listen to? How do I feel generally? What am I drawn to in a movie? What am I drawn to in a song? What am I drawn to in an image? And go, okay, I'm quite an emotional dude. I love crying to certain music. I love sitting and being I'm an empathetic person. I love emotion. I feel a lot of emotion. So I can carry that into my storytelling. I can carry that into my images and go, okay, well, that's why I love scale. That's why I love simple compositions. That's why I love minimalism, because those images tell a very clear and concise story, and I can start to portray an emotion through those images. And suddenly you're able to recognize that, hey, your style, the thing that you love, or your taste for great artwork can be used to construct your own style. And that's what I say by steal like an artist. It's like nothing about that is unique. But because you've brought so many different movies and songs and images and artists and painters and all the different things that construct that style, suddenly if you made a piece of artwork that took a little bit from your composition list and took a little bit from the color palette and took a little bit from the emotion that you're trying to portray, suddenly that is unrecognizable to anyone else. Suddenly that is a piece of artwork that seems original or seems unique, when in reality it's far, far from unique. In reality, it's just a bunch of movies and a bunch of photographs and a bunch of images and a bunch of artists that you admire that have gone into creating that style. But anyone who sees it from the outside looking in goes, wow, that's unique. That's a style that no one else can recognize as anything else, because you've combined so many different elements. A really simple way to explain this is if I create a piece of Photoshop art, or I create a piece of digital art, and let's say I took the composition from Phase Runner, I took the extreme style from Benny Productions, I took the color from Short Stash, and then maybe I took the overall sort of theme from, I don't know, Mad Max. Let's say I take that color palette from there, but I create this simple sort of vibe from Short Stash's color and merge those into two. That's 4 inspiration sources that are very, very mainstream sources. Those are big artists in this industry. Those are people that have very clear styles that are recognizable as their own. It's only 4 inspiration types, but I guarantee you if I took all of those things and merged it into one, no one would be able to recognize each individual element coming from each different direction, and they'd see that and go, wow, that's unique, that's original. And in my mind, I know that that's far, far from original. So that's what I'm trying to get at today, is that stop aiming for unique, stop aiming to be original, and start trying to understand that nothing anyone ever makes is completely original. Nothing anyone ever makes is entirely unique, and that's okay. You don't need to aim for original, because aiming for unique, aiming for original is just a sign, all it is another shiny distraction that distracts you from doing the work that's most important. At the end of the day, if you're aiming to be unique, if you're aiming to make something that's entirely original, all you're doing is wasting your time chasing something that isn't possible. When in reality, you should just be doing stuff that leads you to making more work. At the end of the day, the most important thing you can do is be making more artworks. If you're an artist and you want to be successful, the most important thing you should do is make more artworks. If you're a podcaster and you want to be successful, the most important thing you should do is make more podcasts. If you're a YouTuber and you want to be successful, the most important thing you should do is make more videos. And the easiest way to do that is to take every single advantage that you have. And for a lot of artists, the only advantage you have when you're first starting out is your taste. You don't have the techniques or skills or individuality yet to create something that's your own. So the best way you can do that is take your incredible taste, take what you admire and incorporate it into your art, rather than going in blind and being like, I need to learn a million different things and I need to do things in a certain way, or I need to be unique. that's all just distraction from what you could be doing in that moment. And this comes back to another point that I love, or another point that I'm incorporating into my upcoming online course, if you guys are interested in that. And that's how you can use this idea of stealing like an artist. That's how you can use these inspiration sources, or whatever you want to describe it as. That's how you can essentially use everything that I've spoken about in this podcast today to make the learning process easier. One of the things that I think people struggle with when they first start out trying to learn Photoshop or trying to learn anything is that they go in with the overwhelming sense of having to learn everything. They go into learning something new with the idea of, I have to learn so much before I'm capable of doing anything. If you go into learning Photoshop, it's intimidating. It's super intimidating because there is so much you can learn. It's a zero-sum game. There is literally never a point where you know everything. Photoshop is the kind of thing that is abstract enough. Lightroom, for example, you can learn everything in a week. If you are strict with how much time you dedicate to it, you can learn everything in a week. Sure, you can combine different ways of editing things and you can learn different styles, but generally you can learn how to use every single tool to the best of your ability in a week. And once you get over that week, boom, you're done. Like that's it. And if you want to fast track that, buy a preset and boom, you're done in an instant. There's a way of literally buying the knowledge for Lightroom. But the issue with Photoshop is that it's a zero-sum game. There is literally never ever a point where you know everything. And that intimidates people. And I think that stops people from trying or even bothering to start because they open it up and go, okay, I could learn how to replace a sky today, but I also could learn everything today. And that stops people from doing anything because they're like, well, if I can learn anything, then why should I learn anything? Does that make sense? It's like you become intimidated by the overall thing. And one of the things that I recognized in myself is that I prioritize action. I have prioritized action my entire life. And I think it comes back to when I was younger. This is a story that's going to relate back, I promise. But when I was younger, my younger brother, he's only 18 months younger than me, but he is incredibly talented athletically. He was always an incredible swimmer. He was always an incredible runner, an incredible football player. I am not. I am far from incredibly talented athletically. I have kind of forced myself to be someone who is talented athletically because of him. And one of the things that I learned when I was younger is that, hey, he's really good at swimming and I'm really shit at swimming. But over time, if I work twice as hard as Jackson does, then I'm able to achieve what Jackson does. And that taught me that anything is figure outable. Anything is learnable. You are able to do anything as long as you prioritize action. There was one summer, I remember this as clear as day. I genuinely think this one summer has completely changed my entire life. I think this summer is single-handedly responsible for creating me into the person I am today. I was a really, really terrible cricket player. Like really, really terrible when I was younger. This would have been when I was like 12 or 13. And Jackson was unbelievable. He was such an incredible fast bowler when we were younger. Maybe we were a little bit older. Maybe we were like 14 and 15. And I just hated it. I hated it because I was a terrible batsman. I was a terrible bowler, and Jackson would always beat me to the team. So he would get picked for the Div 1 team and I'd get picked for the Div 2 or Div 3 team. And one summer, I remember I decided, I was like, I'm just going to bowl at a wall in the backyard. There was this wall and like a patch of grass and you could run up and bowl as if you were bowling at a batsman. And I just decided that every single day for that summer, I was going to spend hours bowling at this wall. And I did it every single day for the entire summer. And in one summer, I went from someone who was not even being picked for the teams to opening the bowling with Jackson. Now, for those that don't know, opening the bowling just means that you're one of the best fast bowlers in the team. And that was from one summer. And that individually taught me that I'm capable of doing literally whatever I want as long as I prioritize action over anything. Now, what am I trying to say with this story? What I'm essentially trying to say is that the easiest way to prioritize action is to give yourself a game plan. The easiest way to make action the priority is to make sure that you have an action plan or a desired outcome from what you're doing. And one of the things that I recognized recently is that I incorporate this into my learning with Photoshop, with digital art, with everything that I do within art. I prioritize this idea of action over figuring things out. And one of the recent examples of this was when I learnt Blender, when I learnt 3D art. One of the things that I did was, rather than going in with the idea of I need to learn everything, which again, Blender is even more of an extreme example than Photoshop. That is a massive zero-sum game. There is literally never a point where you know everything with Blender, just like Photoshop. But the thing that I did is I go, okay, what do I like about Blender? What do I want to create in Blender? And I went to Geo. Geo let me... anyway, I'll tag him in the Instagram comments. He's an incredible incredible digital artist within Blender, incredible 3D artist. And I also liked It's Kaiwan or Kaiwan. I can't remember his last name, but Kaiwan is someone I also really, really admired. And I go, okay, I really like their work. Like, I really like their work. How can I make that? And I didn't care about learning how to model things. I didn't care about learning how to pose people. I didn't care about learning how to light things. I didn't care about anything other than how can I make that? And what that meant is I spent one day learning the basics. I spent another day learning everything that I need to learn about, like characters and how to find subjects and assets, and learning how to set up my Blender scene and learning how to use all the tools to make my own artwork. And then on the third day, I was able to make an original art piece. And the reason for that is not because I'm a fast learner. It's not because I am, I naturally am able to use Blender. That's bullshit. The reason why I was able to do that is because I set myself a goal that was easy to attain. All I needed to learn how to do was pose a character, put a subject into a scene, or put an object into a scene, and then light the scene. That's all I needed to learn how to do. But because I was able to do that, because I was able to focus my energy, people look at that and go, how the fuck did you learn Blender in 3 days? I didn't learn Blender in 3 days. I learned how to do a very specific thing in 3 days. And I think that people get so overwhelmed when they're learning something new. It's like, if you go into Premiere Pro and you're like, I want to learn how to create a film. It's like, okay, great. Where the fuck do you start? Whereas if you go in, you're like, I want to learn how to edit a podcast. Okay, very simple. We've got 2 tutorials you can watch here. You can create this, record some voiceover, and boom, by the end of that day, you could be proficient at editing podcasts in Premiere Pro. Suddenly, you can take that energy and go and get a job editing someone else's podcast, and boom, you're a professional at that program in a day. But if you go in with the idea of, I'm going to learn Premiere Pro, well done, mate. You've got yourself a monolith of a task ahead of you because you haven't set yourself any specific goal. So one of the things that I am doing with this upcoming online course is I'm essentially structuring it in a way that we take your taste, we take what you like about certain artworks, we take what you admire in other artists, and then we develop you a learning plan. We develop what you need to know to achieve what you want to achieve. So say, for example, if you were looking at my artwork and you go, I really like Tom's landscape edits in Photoshop. If you learnt that and you go, okay, I really like that, all you need to learn is sky replacements, blending, and a little bit of that's it, essentially. All you need to learn is how to blend things and how to replace a sky. And that's it. Once you know those 2 things, you can recreate my artwork. Now, I'm not trying to tell you that once learning 2 things, you can be a successful artist. That's far from what I'm trying to say. What I'm trying to say is that I'm also not trying to say this will be easy. This takes work. This takes a lot of work. There was a period of about a week and a half where all I was doing every single day was Blender. Now, I have the opportunity to do that, of course. Not everyone has that opportunity, but it was hard work for that week and a half that all I was doing was focusing on Blender. But what I'm trying to tell you is there is an easier way to do this than just blindly approaching something with the aim of, I'm going to learn this. I'm going to learn X. I'm going to learn how to make YouTube videos. It's like, no, don't learn how to make YouTube videos. Say, I'm going to learn how to make a Matt Diavella YouTube video, or I'm going to learn how to make an Ali Abdaal YouTube video, or I'm going to learn how to make this or that or this specific thing, because suddenly doing that is way less intimidating and you can prioritize action over just blindly learning. Now, I want to finish this podcast with a little bit of a preface for this, and that's that nothing is unique and nothing is original, but in order to be successful, you have to be different. You have to be different in order to be successful. Now, you might look at that and go, that's a little bit of an oxymoron. Aren't you saying that nothing's unique and nothing's original? I don't think that being different is the same as being original. I think being original is aiming for something that's not possible. Nothing is original. Nothing is unique. Everything that has been made, everything that will be made has been made in a certain way. The way that you're going to approach it is differently. What can you bring to the table that no one else can bring to the table? What do you have as a character? What is it that you bring that another person can't bring? It's like if you look at an artist you admire and you go, they're great for these reasons, instead of looking at that and going, well, I can't achieve what they do and I'm just going to be a B grade version of this person, go, okay, what do I have that they don't have? What's my unfair advantage in this situation that they don't have? Maybe you live in an amazing location and you can go, okay, well, I get the chance to photograph a scene every single day that people only dream of traveling to one day. That's my unfair advantage. Maybe you love talking to camera, and maybe that's something that you consider to be a hobby. What is it that you find enjoyable that other people see as work? Use that. What is your unfair advantage? Maybe you're super fortunate and you come from a wealthy family and you have money and you have the ability to travel all the time because you have money. Or maybe you for whatever reason, you picked up a job when you were younger that's really, really easy and you're able to do things on the side. What is your unfair advantage in a situation? Or hell, maybe you're charismatic. Maybe you're just a dude or a woman or anyone who just is super charismatic and great at talking to camera or great at creating art or great at doing certain things. It's like, what do you bring to the table that's different? Not unique, what's different? And how can you combine certain styles or certain things and do something a little bit differently? Because you need to be different to be successful. No one's going to follow. I said this on my stream to someone who asked me to critique their Instagram. I went on their Instagram and the first thing I thought was, this is Short Stash's Instagram. And it's like, why would I follow him if I can just follow Short Stash? Does that make sense? It's like, this is such a cliche piece of advice and it's given so often, but that's because it's true. It's like, why would I follow the B grade version of this certain artists? Why would I follow them when I can just follow the artists themselves? So what's a way to bypass that? You take their style and you bring to the table what you can do differently. How can you do that thing differently? How can you make something, and I need to learn this myself. It's like one of the things I'm struggling with YouTube right now is incorporating this into my work. I haven't quite figured out how I can do Photoshop tutorials differently. How can I do speed art videos differently? How can I do productivity videos differently? I need to figure that out for myself, and it's not something I'm yet proficient at, but it's something I'm working on. It's like, how can I take the productivity genre, or how can I take the personal development genre or Photoshop or whatever it is that I want to do on YouTube? How can I take that and do it differently? How can I do this podcast differently? And I think that's one thing I have done well with this podcast is like, there's not many people doing these sort of solo podcasts within the creative niche. Most people doing podcasts within this niche are doing like guest shows and they're interviewing the same people. And one of the gripes that I had with this niche is that there was a dozen podcasts, but all of them were exactly the same because all they were doing was interviewing the same people and everyone was asking the same questions and going through the same route. And one of the things that I wanted to do was have something that's a little bit different. So I just talk about the same things that they talk about, but I do it solo. And that's a small change, but it's different enough that people seem to really enjoy it. And it's developed a little bit of a following. Like the following for this podcast is not massive, but people seem to really enjoy the podcast. And it's a part of their weekly routine, or it's something that's essential to their week. And that's something that I really, really like out of what we're doing. So before I finish this episode, I just want to recap because it has been a little bit of a ramble. The first thing that I spoke about was there's no such thing as being completely original or completely unique. So give up on trying to achieve that. Give up on trying to be completely unique or completely original, and instead focus on how you can incorporate multiple different styles and steal like an artist. How can you take the things that you admire, the things that you like, and incorporate it into your own work by stealing like an artist? The second is, how can you develop this strategy for learning? It's like, how can you, rather than try to prioritize everything and try to learn everything, how can you take something very specific and just focus on learning that? And the third thing, what was the third thing I spoke about? I just finished speaking about it, but I've somehow forgotten my train of thought. I've completely forgotten my train of thought. Try to be different. That's what it was. Try to focus on being different, not unique. It's like, what can you bring to the table that no one else can? What's your unfair advantage? What's the thing that you have that someone else doesn't? It's like, if you want to copy someone else's work, if you really admire Garrett, or you really admire me, or you really admire anyone else, it's like, rather than just copying their work, how can you do that work differently? How can you do that particular thing differently? It's like, one of the things for me is like, I really like cinematic storytelling photography. I like that sort of really dramatic style of photography, but how can I do that with digital art? How can I create 3D art or Photoshop art, but then make it in a style that's cinematic? And that's one of the things that's lacking in this niche right now, is that most digital artists are very ethereal, they're very colorful, it's very abstract, it's very stylized. But how can I take that specific style of Photoshop art or 3D art, and how can I make it cinematic? And I think that's a hole in the market. I think that's something that I can start to incorporate into my own work. One of the unfair advantages I have with YouTube right now is I'm making tutorial content for Photoshop and photographers, but I just spent the last 5 years as a filmmaker professionally. So I can incorporate the knowledge I have for lighting and cameras and gear and audio and incorporate that into tutorials that look better, feel better, sound better, and all of a sudden I have an unfair advantage going into creating content that other people already make. And that's my way of doing it differently. Does that make sense? I hope you've enjoyed this episode. I think I'm going to leave it there. I hope you've enjoyed this episode. Just before I finish, I want to preface this with something, or I want to talk about something that's important if you've gotten all the way to the 45-minute mark of this podcast. I am launching my Patreon this week. It's something I've been thinking about for a long time. It's something I have labored over for a while and wondered whether it was worth it or not worth it, or whether anyone would even want to sign up. And at the end of the day, I've gotten to the point where I love this podcast. I really enjoy this podcast, but it's not financially sustainable right now for me. And not in the sense that I want to make any money from this podcast, but in the sense that I am committing so much time to it and not making any money that it's irresponsible of me to continue down this route. So I want to give people the opportunity who enjoy this podcast to support this podcast. Before I launch it this week, I want you to know that nothing is going to change as far as the free content here. Nothing's going to change as far as the podcast. There will be bonus episodes going to a certain tier of Patreon supporters, and there will be a private community, but nothing is going to change as far as the free podcast. So please, if you are under any financial duress, if you're under any financial stress whatsoever, you do not need to sign up for this Patreon. Actually, I would encourage you not to sign up for this Patreon. If this is the kind of thing where you have to choose between signing up for this Patreon and choosing between something else, choose that something else. Do that. I don't want you to sign up if this is something that you cannot afford. If you are young and you're using your pocket money or you're using your allowance or whatever it is for this, don't sign up. Please prioritize your own financial security over this Patreon. But if you want to support the Patreon, please consider it, because it would help me to continue doing this show to the best of my ability, and it would help me scale. One of the issues that I'm experiencing right now, like I spoke about earlier in the podcast, is that it's all very well and good for me to make the audio episodes every single week, but we're not gaining listeners because there's nothing that I'm doing to expand the podcast. There's nothing that I'm able to do with the time that I have to expand the podcast, and that's what I want to focus on through this Patreon. I essentially want to reinvest every single dollar that comes through the Patreon back into someone to help me grow it, someone to help me edit it, someone to help me free up my time so I can convert that time back into growing this show. So if that is something that you're interested in, if this is a podcast that you have liked for a very long time and you enjoy it and you think that I deserve your appreciation or support, or you just want an opportunity to support me, there'll be a very cheap tier. It'll start at $3.50, I believe, a month. So very, very cheap, and go all the way up to $15 if you are feeling generous. But if it is something that you want to do, please consider subscribing to the Patreon. It'll be up sometime this week if you're listening to it live, and if you're not listening to it live, it'll be in the link of this podcast description, as well as the description of every other podcast moving forward. So I hope you've enjoyed this episode. If you have enjoyed this episode, please consider sharing it with a friend. Like I've said every single episode, sharing it with someone you know, or word of mouth, is the best and single most powerful way to grow this podcast. So if you enjoyed this episode, if you gained anything from it, please consider sharing it with a friend with a little note of why you've shared it. Just tell them that you gained this from it, or you were just entertained for 45 minutes once a week. whatever it is that you think they'll gain value from, please consider sharing it because it would really, really help me out. But with all that said and done, I'll speak to you guys next week.